Hey guys, coming to you today doing a What's Next on Shawn Porter, the former two-time welterweight champion of the world and the current top contender in the 147-pound welterweight division. He's my number 5 welterweight right now. He's coming off of a loss in his last fight to Errol Spence by a very close split decision. He lost the WBC title in that fight. It was a unification bout. It was a very good fight. They went toe-to-toe. He came up just short to Spence, who's, one of the best fighters in boxing pound for pound. So no shame there. Very close. He actually boosted his rating with that performance, as a lot of people thought Spence was going to whip his ass, and he came out and really went toe-to-toe with Spence. So it's kind of the best case scenario if he was going to lose, was to put up a performance like he did. So we haven't heard really anything on what he could be doing next. Like, there's no major rumors dominating on who he could be fighting. So let's take a look at what's next for Shawn Porter and see what possibilities are out there. We start with number 1, the undefeated and unified IBF WBC welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr., which would be a rematch. Right now, I think the possibility's there, but I'm leaning towards the less likely, because Spence is Porter is the number 1 contender in the WBC right now, but they haven't mandated him to face Errol Spence. The WBC is kind of loose with their mandatories. They only set down mandatories the last maybe 2-3 years. They only set down mandatories when they want to, basically. If they got a guy with a big name, they let that guy hold on to that title and don't really enforce the mandatories too harshly, and sometimes they do, but like with the Canelo thing or Vasily Lomachenko, they allow these guys to become franchise champions. Now there's a new fucking thing like that where really you're not the champion anymore, but you can come back and still somewhat call yourself champion. They're getting very corrupt and loose with it, but what that means is it allows more optional defenses. So that's the positive side of it, because a lot of these guys should be able to fight the best fighters and not have to fight guys that just paid to be number 1, because that's really what it is. So again, Porter is the number 1 to Spence right now, but I don't think the WBC is going to mandate Porter to face Spence in a rematch next. I think they're going to allow Spence to face, if Manny Pacquiao doesn't choose him, I think they're going to allow an optional defense for Spence against Danny Garcia, is what I see. But that depends on what Pacquiao decides. If Pacquiao decides to face Mikey Garcia, then that leaves Danny Garcia open for Errol Spence. But if he chooses to face Danny Garcia, would Spence want to face Mikey in a rematch? He'd be the next biggest name, or Porter. And Porter would make sense because the fight was actually close and he beat the shit out of Mikey, so that wouldn't make sense. So it's kind of up in the air. I'm leaning towards the less likely, but I do think it's possible that these two guys could lock horns again later this year. But I think Spence would have to be kind of desperate because his other options didn't pan out. So again, I'm leaning towards the less likely. Number 2 is undefeated WBO champion Errol Spence Jr. Terrence Crawford, I'm sorry. This fight has been talked about, rumored. Both sides have went back and forth. First they didn't want it, now they say they'd be down to do it. But it just doesn't look likely, and it's a shame because these two guys do get along. They do know each other personally, but one's with Top Rank and Bob Arum and them, and the other side is with the PBC and Shawn Porter, and it's a shame because I think these two guys are the most willing fighters to face purely anybody in the division without picking and choosing. And it's a shame that they can't work out a deal because, Crawford, in my opinion, is wasting away. There's so many good fighters and good fights to make for him at 147, and he's just wasting away facing nobodies, and he's going after bigger names and more money, and guys that are willing to fight. Like, next he's leaning towards Kell Brook, which Brook has beaten Porter, but that was way back in 2014, and Brook's not even, he's been so inactive with injuries and stuff that the fight it's not really going to boost Crawford's ratings. He's just doing it because Brook's willing to fight. He's a bigger name, and he's a bigger name worldwide, because he's got a big fan base in the United Kingdom, but it's mostly because the PBC guys don't want to fight Crawford, and it's sad. So you know, I would love to see this fight. I think there's an outside chance of it happening, but I really got to lean towards the not likely, and it's a shame. So hopefully that can change, though. Number 3 is Manny Pacquiao. I do think Porter's an option for Pacquiao, but I just think he's got better options in terms of better names and less chance of losing with those bigger names, like Mikey Garcia. Mikey has a bigger name, maybe a less chance of losing because Mikey's a smaller fighter like Pacquiao is, you know, so he looks as Mikey as a less of a threat. Danny Garcia, as much as I hate to say it, and because Porter beat Danny, Danny's got a bigger name than Porter. You know, he's got a bigger following and a bigger name. So that's partly why, you know, Danny would be a better option for Pacquiao. Plus, I think stylistically it's probably a better matchup because Porter's a brawler that comes straight at you and tries to break you down. Danny's kind of more of a slash boxer puncher, you know, and that's a better matchup for Manny. So, you know, so it's kind of a shame because I really do think, you know, Manny and Porter would be a good fight, but, you know, I do think Porter's an outside option, but again, I'm leaning towards the less likely. I don't think it's going to happen. Next up at number 4 is a rematch against former unified champion Keith Thurman. Thurman's not going to take this fight, especially next. Thurman, I don't think he wants anything to do with Porter. I think he wants the bigger names, the more beatable guys that are the bigger names, but also his next fight is probably going to be against a tune-up type opponent, you know, or a B, or likely a C-level welterweight, because the B-level welterweights are good. So I think Thurman, after a long time off, long layoff again, it's going to be a year and some change by the time he comes back towards the end of the year, close to a year and a half maybe. I think he's going to want to face just kind of a so-so opponent and not, you know, threaten himself too much. And trust me, Porter's a serious threat to Thurman, and he knows that because he's been in a ring with him and barely got out of that fight with a close decision. So, yeah, not seeing this one next, but I would love to see it. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Number 5 is Porter. Number 6 is a rematch with Danny Garcia. I guess it's possible if both guys get asked out, you know, in terms of the ratings with, you know, with whoever the top guys choose. You know, I guess the best scenario that I could see would be, you know, for these guys to lock horns would be if Pacquiao went and chose Mikey Garcia, and then Errol Spence decided to not go with Danny Garcia and chose to do something else because he doesn't want to risk too much in his first fight back from the car accident. That's the only way I realistically see these two guys looking at each other and saying, hey, let's do a rematch. But honestly, I don't think Danny wants anything to do with Porter because he risked enough facing Porter the first time, but the WBC title was on the line. But it was a very close fight, so at the end of the day, I don't see why Danny would snare at a rematch because the first fight was fucking really close, and it, you know, you could have argued that Danny won, you know. I thought Porter personally won by the same scores. It was very close, though. It was like 7 rounds to 5, and there were some tough rounds to score. So, you know, it's difficult, you know, but I think, you know, Danny should give him a rematch, you know, and fight him again just to move up and to get bigger fights if the top dogs don't choose them. But again, I don't think Danny wants anything to do with that. Number 7 would be a rematch with Yordenis Ugas. You know, it's crazy. Porter's fought so many of the top 6 guys around him. I think he's fought 4 of those 6 fighters. He beat Ugas last year by a controversial split decision, you know, and retained the WBC title. Personally, I don't think he wants anything to do with Ugas next. Ugas isn't a big name, and he poses a threat because of his style, you know. And it was an ugly fight the first time, so I don't think Porter would consider him. Number 8, Mikey Garcia. I think this fight's possible, but again, Porter's going to be like a third option for Mikey. If Mikey does not get the Pacquiao fight like he wants, I think he's going to look at a Danny Garcia fight. But what if Danny were to choose Danny Garcia over Mikey Garcia? That's where things get interesting. Then it becomes what Errol Spence wants to do. So if Pacquiao chooses a showdown with Danny Garcia next, and then Errol Spence decides, hey, I don't want to fight Mikey because I whipped his ass. and I don't want to fight Porter because that's too tough of a fight in my first fight back, then I could definitely see Mikey looking at Shawn Porter say, hey, let's do this, because Mikey wants to challenge himself, and Porter's a great challenge. So I could see it from that level, and we just got to see how it plays out, but I can see it being possible. Number 9 is Sergey Lipinets. That's not going to happen. He's lined up in an interim title fight next, so he's not going to give Mikey any play. Porter any play. And then the 3-way tie for 10th. You got Josecito Lopez. I think the fight's possible because Porter might get asked out in terms of the top guys, so he might just want to stay busy, and taking on a guy like Lopez, a former world title challenger and good, solid fighter, I think would make sense. So I think this fight is possible next for Porter. After him, Jesse Vargas. Vargas is moving back up to 154, in my opinion. Plus, the PBC would have to get together with Matchroom for this fight, and I just don't think they're going to do that. There's too many options for Porter and more beatable options, less threats in the PBC fighting at welterweight. And then the last guy is Thomas Delorme. Delorme, I don't see it. He's fighting Jamal James next, most likely, and I believe he's going to lose to James, so I don't see that one. So what do I personally think Shawn Porter's going to do next? Well, I really think Pacquiao's going to face Mikey Garcia next. And after he chooses Mikey, I think Errol Spence is going to choose Danny Garcia, which is going to force Porter into probably facing Josecito Lopez, in my opinion. Somebody on that level at least. But I think Josecito Lopez would probably be the logical choice for Porter, and I think that's probably how it's going to play out. That's just me, and there's no certainty there, or I don't know anything. I'm just saying what I believe is going to happen. I believe Porter's going to face Josecito Lopez or somebody on that level next, with a name but not a threat to him, just so he can move forward and stay in line for the big fight. So we'll see. But I would really hope, if that scenario happens, I would hope that Terrence Crawford would be the opponent, but I just don't think that's going to be the case. So, all right, guys, that's the what's next on Shawn Porter, former 2-time welterweight champion. I hope you enjoyed it. True Boxing, you've been hit with the truth.